Salutations and welcome to Monomythic. I'm Kevin Garcia, professional comic book historian, and our episode today is presented as part of the first Geekspanic Heritage Month, a celebration of Hispanic heritage and Latinx history for National Hispanic Heritage Month, which is, of course, from September 15th to October 15th. Geekspanic Heritage Month is presented as a partnership between Monomythic.com and the Nerdtino Expo, the first East Coast Latinx comic book convention. For this episode, we're joined by artist and advocate John Picacio, with whom we'll be discussing covers, posters, cards, face masks, and the Hakonex Initiative. Welcome, John.
Hey, how's it going?
John, you're based out of San Antonio, correct?
I am. Yes, I am.
Oh. Well, I'm based out of Austin. I myself was raised down in the border in Brownsville, Texas, and actually, I think I first saw a lot of your art at some of the conventions down there in Brownsville, where they were really pushing it there at the Art Museum and some of the heritage centers there.
I remember that a couple of years ago. Yeah, it was an interesting event. That was cool. Yeah, good people down there.
But I think you've made a really, really big name for yourself in the publishing industry. Book covers, posters, audiobook and album collection covers. How did all that get started? I know that one of your biggest things you're known for is J.R.R. Martin's Song of Fire and Ice covers, and also Game of Thrones, known as Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can give you there's a lot of different versions of this that have different lengths. Now I'm just going to kind of gauge it and give you a medium level. I'm a comic book geek, just like you, from the word go. That's how I learned how to read. That was my first language. It's still the first love. But it's not what I do professionally, at least not at this time. But there were a lot of years in my formative years were very much about DC and Marvel comics and the craft of those things and wanting to someday do it. And so in high school, that was kind of what I knew I wanted to do. But got a few scholarship offers, but not for drawing. It was more just academic stuff. And parents really wanted me to go toward a professional degree, not toward an art degree, thinking it would be more stable. And so that pressure kind of put upon me to not look at art as a collegiate choice, but architecture was what I ended up choosing. Why? For no other reason than that I would be able to draw for a living. And that was what appealed to me versus any other professional degree. It was that stupid. It was that naive for me to make that choice.
Honestly, I had a similar experience in college, thinking about art versus writing and thinking, well, which one is a professional? And honestly, I wish I had stuck more with my art, because I did that when I was younger and I let it just go by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, they were really pressuring me to go that direction toward a professional degree. So I did the professional degree in 5 years. It was a 5-year program. I did it, but all the while, I knew that there was going to be a whole art angle somewhere in my professional trajectory. I never let go of it. There was a trip in my 3rd year of architecture school where we went to Europe as a class, and it was a pivotal moment in my life, I would say, because I had never been on a plane before. This is when what was I? I think I was 20 at that point. I had never been on an airplane, obviously never left the United States. And here it was, I was dropped into London. What is that? That's 1990. And this is literally 30 years ago, almost to the day that we're recording this. Now that I think of it, it's 30 years almost to the day.
Well, happy anniversary on that one.
Isn't that crazy? We landed in London, and this is at a time when Vertigo Comics does not exist yet. We're still with Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, Watchmen, Dark Knight. Those things have all kind of made their presence felt. There was something called Violent Cases that came out around that time. It had already come out in the UK. In America, I think it was just starting to break. And it was this graphic novel by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. That had a big influence, I remember. That work, Kent Williams, John Muth, a lot of the Painterly guys, George Pratt, a lot of that work made me really want to be a comic storyteller, more a comics artist than a comics writer. But I knew I wanted to tell my own stories. And I think that's an important beat as we carry this conversation forward. So to kind of speed this along here, getting out of college, I ended up writing and drawing my own comic books, and worked with a partner, and we shared an anthology where he wrote and drew his own stories, and I wrote and drew my own stories. And that self-published comic called Words and Pictures ended up getting seen by book publishers, small book publishers, independent book publishers, not because I solicited their interest or their attention, but just they found them.
That was a good time for indie comic book producers. It's not that indie comics are ever going to be immediately big business, but that was a time when there were a lot of eyes on indie makers. So that was fortuitous, I guess.
It really was. And there was a guy named Dave Sim who created a book called Cerebus that was a really major independent, black and white independent comic book at the time. And he was one of the big players, and he took a liking to what we were doing. And as I recall, there was a Cerebus issue where a series of Cerebus issues where he took the sidebar of his covers and he would feature covers of certain comics that he really thought were strong, independent comics. It was a really sweet move and generous move of him. And one of my covers was on, in fact, it was the first cover I ever did for a comic book, was on a Cerebus issue around that time. This would be around, now we're speeding up to about 1994 or so. And so those comics are what made book publishers say, hey, have you ever thought about doing book covers? And I said, no, I've never thought about doing them. And they said, would you like to? And I remember my first response was no. It was for a Michael Moorcock book. And I remember thinking that I was enjoying doing comics so much that why would I want to do science fiction book covers? Even though I loved science fiction, I loved fantasy, and I knew who Michael Moorcock was, I knew how big he was. But they said, well, wouldn't you want to do this job? And so I started asking questions, as I tend to do. I said, well, who's doing the typesetting for the book, and who's doing the interiors, and who's doing the jacket layout, and how does all this work? And they said, well, we just want you to do the cover. Why do you want to know all that? And I said, well, if I can build a house, why can't I build a book? This is a totally arrogant thing to say as a 20, I mean, it's a 20-something thing to say. And in retrospect, it's incredibly arrogant. But the guys were really sweet about it and said, well, do you want to do all that? And I said, yeah, I kind of want to learn. And so they said, well, here's a pile of money, go do it. And I took it and I fell in love. I fell in love not only with the process of how a book comes together, not only the responsibility of creating a piece of cover art, but I fell in love with the field. I fell in love with all the machinations of publishing, and it was a life-changing experience. So the comics led to that, and I've never looked back, honestly, to this point. I've continued trying to build my career as a cover artist, but there have been pivots here that we can get into as we talk about kind of where I'm headed as an independent storyteller.
Well, you mentioned Michael Moorcock, of course, well-known fantasy author, especially for the Elric series, and then you mentioned your inspiration being some Neil Gaiman books, of course, also well-known for fantasy. You describe yourself as not initially wanting to do that fantasy and sci-fi art solely, but you've really carved out a niche for yourself in that. You worked also on a Harlan Ellison piece, I understand, because that's an icon to me. I think about him when it comes to sci-fi. He's just really, really amazing.
It's Dangerous Visions. It was one of his big anthologies, and that came out. The original Dangerous Visions comes out, I guess, in the late '60s, early '70s. I'm having trouble pinning it down, but no, it's in the mid to late '60s. And anyway, so they asked me to do a cover for the 35th anniversary edition of it. I think Michael Whalen did a cover. I did a cover, and there was an artist out of Finland whose name escapes me. But they asked the three of us to do different covers for an anniversary edition of Dangerous Vision. So, yeah, I got to work actually with Harlan, or not work with him. Well, he called me up and said, I want you to do this. And I think he had an idea of what he wanted, and I wouldn't say I dismissed it, but I had my own ideas, let's put it that way, of what I thought could be cool. And as you would expect with a guy like Harlan, there was certainly conversations, let's just say, where he pushed back, but I pushed back as well. And I think with someone like that, he's a human being, just like I am. He puts his pants on the same way. And so I don't think I had any...
as far as we know.
Yeah, I didn't have any feeling of being intimidated by him, but I had heard of his reputation. In the end, it ended up being a really nice working relationship. I think the piece made it into Spectrum that year. And I think at the time, again, this is way back earlier in my career, I think that piece ended up helping me get more visibility for my covers. Having that association with him, I'm certain didn't hurt. But yeah, that was a one-time thing early on. It was a fortuitous thing that happened.
Well, as long as I'm geeking out about it, I'm also a big Trekkie and X-Men fan. I saw on your biography on your website, you mentioned both Star Trek and X-Men. I know you did a few Star Trek covers. Was when it comes to doing things like that, where it's like if you're interpreting a book, like say Elric or something, there are other covers to kind of go by, but it's still more of characters that are primarily in the printed form. But if you're adapting something that has been a TV show or a cartoon or whatever else, there's a more standard image to go by. Is that more difficult? Is it harder to do those kind of adaptations? Is it easier? Do you prefer to do ones where you're completely, using your imagination, or do you prefer to do ones where you can have a guide?
No, it's the first one. When you're able, what I want, the ideal job is, it's what George R. R. Martin said to me. In fact, when he hires me for the Song of Ice and Fire calendar, whatever it was, 2010, when he asked me to do it, 2009 actually. Now I think of it. Random House was the publisher on it, but George is the one that approached me and said, "I want a John Picacio vision of my book characters," and that was his exact line that he pitched to me at the bar when he asked me to do this project. And that's what you want to hear as an artist. At least that's what I want to hear. I'm not really interested in doing my take of somebody else's take on something. I'm just not going to be. I'm probably not even going to do the job in the first place. I'll just politely, hopefully, say no. I've been pretty fortunate, but also I think I've been largely because of being influenced by guys like Mike Moorcock, who very early on sort of steered me in the right direction. I think I've been careful to take jobs that were things where there was a place for me in the job, as opposed to just me being a hired hand. So, like, I'll throw something out to the artists that are listening to this. I think one of the most important pieces of advice I ever got, in fact, was from Moorcock. And I don't even know if he meant it as a piece of advice, but here's how it went. It was when I did that first book cover. The managing editor and the publisher took me to Mike's house. I think at the time he had a few houses, and one of them was here in Texas. And so went and visited him at his place, and I'm sitting on the sofa, and he's talking to Rick, the managing editor, and he shifts over to me, and I said, "Hey, Mike, I've got my sketchbook here, and I've got some thoughts about the interiors, but what would you like to see me do? Like, what would you like to see?" And he says, before he even looks at any of the stuff, he says, "You're the artist, you figure it out." And then he turned to Rick and said something, and they had a little quick kibitz, and then he came back and talked to me some more. But that moment of him saying that, he didn't mean it as a put down, believe me. And he said it in just like this real sweet way, but it was super direct. And he looked me straight in the eye. And I remember feeling like everything just kind of melted at that point. And I remember the car ride on the way home, hearing those words and thinking about what that meant and what he just said. Let's just put this in context.
It's like trust.
Yeah, you're talking about one of the biggest fantasy writers that there's ever been. And you're talking about one of the greenest rookies you could possibly ever imagine in this business. I've never done anything like this. I've never done any of this before. And yet this guy is saying, "You're being handed the ball. Don't hand it back to me. Your job is essentially to take us someplace that we couldn't go by ourselves." And that's what I say to artists, is like, that's what you want. That's the position you want to put yourself in. That's the responsibility you want to carry and project into a project. And that was, in those few words, impressed upon me by Mike. And I'll never be able to say thank you enough for that. I've tried to say thank you to him, and it's just that has set the tone for my career from that point forward. It's not a thing of me saying I'm the man. It's not me saying, well, everybody else just needs to listen to me. No. It's not. That's not what it's about. But it is about saying, cultivating a perspective and developing a relationship with every project you have and the material that you're being asked to work from, and having a take on it and being able to share that with an audience, as opposed to going into a project saying, "What do you guys want me to draw?" That's not the way to go. So, the Star Trek gigs, it was about actor likenesses, but it was still about me having a sort of a personal take in a way about Star Trek. It was one of the first syndicated series I can ever remember seeing. I'm sorry, it's one of the first television experiences I can ever remember having. I wasn't there for when Star Trek, the original series, first launched. I'm not that old. But I was there for when it's syndicated in the mid-'70s. And so coming home from school and seeing that stuff at 4 o'clock in the afternoon was seminal for me. So then years later, getting to do those covers was a big deal. So yeah, there's a lot of love in those covers. And then same with X-Men. I mean, I grew up when John Byrne and Terry Austin and Chris Claremont were doing those, incredibly revolutionary storylines that we're still, seeing interpretations of today. And I got to be there when those things were happening and coming out on the newsstand every month. And those had a huge influence. So getting to do my take on X-Men for a mass market paperback was a big deal. But I think I also realized from those experiences, I didn't want to just be doing actor likenesses. I didn't want to just be doing my take on existing characters. I wanted to be creating fresh takes of characters that people had never heard of or that were little known, or even things that were coming straight out of my head. That was more rewarding. Not everybody's like that, but for me, I figured out pretty early on that's what I wanted to do. That said, if X-Men comes back around, if Batman were to come around, Doctor Strange, Shadow, whatever, some of these favorites I have, Spectre, Phantom Stranger, hell yeah. Yeah, I'm going after that. But I'll still try to put my own personal take. Otherwise, why are they hiring me, right?
I could really see your spin on something like Doctor Strange or the Spectre or Phantom Stranger, because those all have that kind of grounded and yet mystical element, which I think a lot of your art has. And here's the thing is that, you were saying a second ago, like you don't want to be tooting your own horn necessarily, but it's not really. You worked with these really big guys, and I don't normally, when I talk to people, I don't normally bring up, oh, well, here's awards you've won, but you've won a lot of awards. World Fantasy Award, Inkpot Award, a couple, some Chesley Awards, sorry, Locus Awards, International Horror Guild Awards, multiple nominations and wins with the Hugo Awards, including one this year. And then also this year, you got the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, Kate
Award.
Wilhelm.
Yeah, the Kate Wilhelm Solstice Award. I mean, that was more for service. I guess as far as awards, did you have a question or did I cut you off?
Well, no, that was it. I wanted to ask you about, first off, how do you get into that kind of category? And second, for our artists that are kind of coming up, I know that sometimes people have told me, well, I don't really, feel like going for awards or worrying about that. But I think that also makes a difference. People notice that and they say, hey, we want you for more things. So I'm kind of curious how that has affected your own career.
Okay, there's a couple of things there. I would say the thing about going for awards, I never went for awards. I don't think that's what you do. In fact, there's a conversation happening with some friends of mine in something called the Hakonex Initiative that I suspect we'll probably be talking about right here. But there's a conversation we've been having about awards and about, what are they and what are they worth? And so, in a nutshell, I'll share with you right now what I was sharing with them privately a little earlier this weekend, which is, we're not in this for awards. I'm not. I certainly am not, nor should. I suspect none of the artists that I respect and admire and am inspired by are motivated to do their work based on awards. It's not why we're here. It's not why you do it. But I think you ask yourself, do you want to do this for a living? Do you want to pay your bills off of this work? Is this what you want to do to support your family? And for me, yes, yes, yes. That is where I want. So it's a professional occupation. This is what I do. I don't do architecture. I left that behind long time ago, 20 years ago, and have been doing this full time. Well, to do that, you've got to have people hiring you, and even before this very social media driven milieu that we're in now, it was always about trying to make sure that you were staying in the attention or on the radar of these publishers. And so I think certain awards do help in that regard. But what I tell some of my artist friends is think of awards like hardware, and most specifically a crowbar. Think of an award like a crowbar.
That's a really good analogy.
It will pop a door open sometimes. Winning an award, even just getting nominated for an award, will pop a door open that was previously locked. Or it may even sometimes create a door that didn't even exist. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that people look at you just slightly differently when you've been nominated for an award or win an award. And I don't mean everybody. There are certain communities that are associated with certain awards that pay attention to those things. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't care. A lot of people out there have no idea what a Hugo is. I guarantee you there's a lot of people who have no idea what a Solstice Award is, and this is totally fine. I think there's a lot of professional artists who don't know what these are. Fine, not a problem. But for those that do know of those things, there's relationships and opportunities that sometimes happen because people say, well, if that group of people recognize this person, maybe I need to be recognizing this person, making sure they're included in the works that I do. And that's where awards can sometimes have benefits that really are important to the growth of a career and to being able to stay alive. So does it improve your art? No, other than maybe it gives you an ego boost. But I think what awards do are create opportunities. And so if you're a professional artist, then you're a business person, plain and simple. You're going to need to be. And so therefore, you don't look at awards as things you go after, but you have to look at awards as, well, if it comes to me, what do I do with it? And that's the way you look at it, is if you were to be in that position, what do you do to use that award to help you create more opportunities to do your art? It's not about making better art. You don't need the award for that, but you do need opportunities to present your art, or to share your art to bigger audiences and get published. And so that's where the awards may have had some positive effect for me and for other artists.
Well, I do want to talk about your art specifically, and by that I mean we've talked a lot about some of the work you've done with others, but you also initiated Lone Boy Publishing,
Yeah.
which is what you've used to produce a lot of your own work, especially the Loteria cards that I think a lot of people who've seen you at conventions have seen those really just groundbreaking paintings. What goes into kind of creating your own publishing entity like that? And what have you done with it?
No, it's kind of an interesting segue there. I mean, I don't think you even planned that, but I'll just flow with it because, I just talked about awards and opportunities. So, okay, so was it 2012? I think I win my first Hugo. And remember also, for artists out there and other pros out there who are listening, so I win that first Hugo in 2012. So that's the beat that you'll see in the Locus resources when they show the Hugo winners over time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that I lost 7 years in a row before I finally broke through. So don't ever forget that also. It's like, winning awards, everybody remembers that bit, but they don't remember all the work that it takes to build up to that, or all the heartbreaks, the losses, and the whatever you want to say, however you want to label these things. I mean, in other words, I don't think, unless you're a really rare one, I think those things, again, you can't chase them. They kind of happen when they happen. Obviously, when I'm losing 7 in a row, it's not under my control how this is going to go. But when it happens, you hope to take advantage of it. And so that leads to Lone Boy, which is I had been doing all these covers, and a lot of people, more and more people were seeing them and liking them and appreciating them and coveting them. And so I ended up winning a Hugo. Then the next year, I win another Hugo. And after winning those 2, I realized, well, I can keep going this direction where I'm sort of this gun for hire that gets this acclaim, and it's all great, but there's got to be more than this. And I don't think this is good enough. I mean, and I don't mean in terms of I need to be more successful. It's in terms of saying I need to evolve. I need to be more than just being a cover artist. I'm doing this fine. Let's go break some new ground. And so what I did is I asked myself, what kinds of stories or projects would I want to create? And one of the first things I wanted to do was take a game that I grew up with, that you probably grew up with as well, called Loteria. For those that don't know what it is, it's a Mexican game of chance played basically like bingo. But instead of letters and numbers, you've got these little iconic emblems. And so these icons, I mean, as Mexican people, I'm 100% Hispanics or Mexican American. And, you grow up with these things. They're almost like your family, these icons. They're part of your existence. And you see them everywhere. And you play the game with your family. It's a pastime. And so I thought, well, I'm going to create a series of images where I do my takes on these icons. And I'm going to do them in a way that nobody's done before. Because there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of takes on Loteria over the decades. And, many of them satirical, many of them very sort of artsy. But I thought, I've never seen anybody do the Loteria like the way I see it in my head. And I thought, well, I need to commit these things to reality here, or try to.
And that's where you created pieces that were both kind of like I was saying earlier, mixing mysticism and realism, but also I saw a lot of influence of Mesoamerican cultures there as well. A lot of that what popularly known as like Aztec or Mayan looks, but also other things that kind of felt like they were part of the culture without being specific to a certain thing necessarily.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool of you to say. I mean, I'm so close to these things that I don't think I've put a whole lot of analysis to it. And I'll speak to that directly. I mean, when I was doing these images at first, I thought I was just doing a series of visuals that were going to be my takes on these older icons. And right about the 4th one, which I would say is El Arpa, the harp, I realized I was telling little stories in my head as I was drawing these images, as I was sketching them, as I was comping them, as I was starting to do the final drawings. And it was really in that final drawing stage where you kind of know what the image is, but you're trying to really flesh it out into that really fully realized form in graphite, that I realized that's when I was sort of talking to myself in lullabies in my head and telling myself these little stories as I was working it out. And I thought, maybe I ought to write these down. And so I started writing down these little vignettes, and it was just for me. Wasn't planning to show them to anybody. But being in publishing, I do have a lot of writer friends and a lot of editor friends, and I showed it to a few that I trusted, and they said, this is pretty good. You might want to think beyond just the pictures. And so I want to speak to what you were saying in that the imagery or whatever's fueling it, because a lot of the work I do for book covers is usually coming from a story source that's outside of me, and it's usually coming from a body of text. Let's just be honest, that then I'm trying to create an image for that will share that body of text or that story with a larger audience. I wanted to do it the other way with this. I wanted to say, I'm not going to use text to inspire these images. I'm just going to do when I look at that image, where does it take me visually? What are the images that start to come to my mind? Don't create stories, just create an image. But as I've just said, I start creating these images, these thumbnails, but as I start developing, a story does start to come in my head. But the equation I'm trying to propose or present here is that instead of it being words that lead to pictures, I try very intentionally and purposefully on this one to make it pictures that might lead to words. In fact, they seem to inevitably lead to words. And I think that's where the book that I'm trying to do, it's one of the important things is that the pictures come first. I'm not creating a set of words or a story or an outline and then saying, I'm going to put pictures to this. These beats that I'm creating with these pictures that seem to just kind of come from a wellspring of just, I don't know, what turns me on and what connects me to the world and how the world connects to me, etc. That's what these Loteria cards are. They're about as personal of a work as I've done so far, may ever do, quite frankly. But I really want the visuals to stand on their own just as iconic pieces at first, but the stories come off of that for me, and that's what's leading into this book that I've been working on called Loteria. There's no publication date on it. I do have a literary agent for it, but
work in progress.
It's a work in progress, and the cards or these images that I do on these oversized cards that I put out through my imprint Lone Boy. I print 1,000 of them at a time, and that's it. Once the 1,000 are gone, they're gone. And so they've started to become sort of coveted collectibles. And what that does, though, is that also, as again, going back to that thing of artists as business people, it helps to support you while you're saying no to lots of book covers because you're starting to create these very intense Loteria images that you're wanting to turn into a book. It takes time to create these images. It takes time to learn to be a writer. And I find that I can't do all of that and be carrying 24 book covers a year, for various publishers. So I have to say no to a lot of opportunities where that's money that I was getting to support my family. So when I created Lone Boy, it was the idea that, well, I'm going to have to merchandise some of this stuff in advance before I even get a publishing deal so that I can stay alive and pay the bills. And so that's kind of where Lone Boy came from. But also just going back to what we were saying in that previous thread, Lone Boy probably doesn't happen if those Hugos don't happen, because when those Hugos happened, it did prompt the question to me of saying, well, what's next? But also, I think there was a sort of a critical mass of people who said, hey, maybe this guy's stuff kind of matters. So, and it's not like there's a lot of people like that, but there was enough of them.
They're noticing. That's what matters there.
Yeah, but there was enough of them that Lone Boy could exist. That's my point, is that, that this little imprint that I created that was publishing and promoting my independent story work was going to have enough people supporting and caring about it that I would be able to keep making a living. So, yeah, it was a progression, and it certainly wasn't strategically diagrammed. Let's just put it that way. It was kind of reacting to the flow of kind of what happens in a career. But there you have it. Yeah.
Speaking about things we mentioned earlier, you talked about, the current social media time and everything else that's happening. And obviously there's a very good reason that there's a lot of people on social media as opposed to in person nowadays. But tying to that, you recently made a face mask, and you took one of these Loteria images, the Calavera image, and you didn't just do what a lot of artists do, which is nothing wrong with that, of course, is taking their images and just putting them on a mask. You turned your image into a mask. And that just was something that I just found fascinating. This idea that this image that is, it is both so familiar and yet so you, and then turning it into something that people could actually, wear. and I'm just kind of curious, how did that come about, and how's that been working out for your fans and your followers?
Yeah. I mean, the single word explanation for it is survival. I mean, all of us.
No conventions right now.
This has been such a hard year for everyone. For every single person watching this, it's rough. It's been rough for everybody, So, for artists, I think a lot of us were in the exact same boat of like, okay, no conventions, and me being in the publishing field in New York, everything contracting, everybody trying to step back and say, okay, how is this going to work now? Well, you've got to still continue to pay the bills and make a living, and if those things are shrinking, then you need to come up with something else. And so it was actually my cousin Adria. I will have to give her credit. She came with me to the 2018 Worldcon in San Jose, the one where I was artist guest of honor, the one where I launched the Hakonex Initiative. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of my PA for that show, and just came of her own volition. Honestly, it was like someone saying, "Hey, I want to go on vacation. I want to walk into an F5 tornado." That was essentially what Adria was doing when she signed on to do that, because I didn't ask her to come. In fact, she said she wanted to, and I just said, "Don't do it. It's going to be one of the hardest times of my life." But she insisted, and it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me. And so while she's not a science fiction fantasy fan, she's continued to sort of take an interest in the community, but also said, with this situation going on, she didn't even give me that piece of advice like that. What she did is she sent me a text, now that I think of it, and she took the official convention shirt from that year that featured that La Calavera artwork, and she folded it up and put it over her face, and just sent me a picture like that. And she didn't need to put words on it. It just made me say, whoa, wait a minute. And it wasn't like I was sitting here panicked thinking, God, how am I going to make a living? But I was at that moment thinking, what's my move here? Well, her sending that little visual made me say, that is a very interesting move, because we're all worried about how to stay safe, how to keep our families safe. And I thought, well, let's use the art to help do that, but let's do it in a fun way, because I figured even back then, and this was around April, I would say now, May or so, early May, I knew that we were all trying to mask up. We're still masking up. But there's going to come a point where we're going to get tired of wearing the same things, and fashion was going to start to rear its head at some point, where we're going to start to say, how can I look cool?
It's becoming part of our world, part of our everyday look, that people want to have a stylish looking mask.
How can I feel good about myself? And so, everybody's different. Everybody's going to want to project themselves, just as with people's T-shirts, it tells something about them. I figured masks were probably going to be like that come late summer, fall. And as it turns out, I think we were right. And I don't think we're the only ones that were thinking that. But I came up with this, what's essentially they call it a neck gaiter, but I did a lot of research as I was coming up with mine and finding the supplier for it. And the one that we have here is a 95% polyester, 5% spandex. Mm-hmm. But it's a thicker material also than a lot of the neck gaiters I was seeing out there that, quite frankly, felt like you were putting a piece of pantyhose on your head. And I just wasn't hip to that, as most people would imagine. So this one, it's a thicker material. It's more durable. And I wanted to, instead of just putting half of my art, I wanted to see the full art on there. But I wanted to allow people to be able to fold it down so that when they wore it, they would have two layers of fabric over their face,
right?
Protection, but also kind of have that iconic look of being able to see the top part of their head and then the lower part with the calavera look to it. So the neck gaiter style allows for that versatility. Also allows people to use it as a balaclava, as a neck scarf. I've seen people use it in a lot of ways, but the classic, most conventional way is, the half mask, as I call it, and that's the way I wear it. And they've been selling great. The first edition sold out within a couple of weeks, and we created a second edition, not because we were planning to do it, just there was enough demand where we just said, let's do it. And so, those have been selling very well, and we continue to sell them. You can find them on my website. They will sell out, I will say, easily by Halloween. In fact, I don't expect they're going to last till Halloween at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
Yeah, there won't be a third edition either. I'm just going to stop there with this and just keep
even if there was like really high demand, because it doesn't require more art on your end, just doing another publication.
But it also requires me taking time to coordinate and fill orders. Like we just spent a large part of this weekend filling all the pre-orders and all the orders up to this point. And I just want to be drawn. Really. I think this has been phenomenal. I love connecting with people. I love seeing my people take care of themselves. And I love knowing that maybe I'm helping a little bit in that regard, and that they're feeling good about themselves while they're doing it. But, you got to also know when enough is enough. And so for me, once I get through this run, I plan to do several more Loteria cards. I've got some other publisher projects that are, on the desk right now, and those need my attention. So yeah, I would say if you want these masks, people get them because they're going to go. And once they do, I'm back in the drawing mode for the rest of the year. Yeah.
Well, speaking of helping the people, and you already mentioned the Hakonex Initiative a couple times. Let's talk about that in earnest. So this was something that you and others put together a few years ago to really help support other creators. Can you tell us about the Hakonex Initiative, how it began, and where it's been going since?
Yeah, it's a big one. I feel like I've been pretty fortunate in a lot of ways. I mean, you make your own luck, of course, but there have been a lot of people. I've mentioned Mike Moorcock already, and George R. Martin. They're people that have given me a hand up in the business, and I guess for all of us out there, for all of us as creators, there's a certain point where I think we all have to give back, and I think some people kind of register that a little sooner than others. For me, I got asked to be the artist guest of honor and the Hugo Master of Ceremonies for that Worldcon I mentioned earlier in San Jose. This was 2018. So when I got invited to do that by the chairman, Kevin Roche, it's a huge honor. For those of you that don't know, I mean, Worldcon guest of honor position is kind of seen as a lifetime achievement award. I'm a little bit young for that, and so. And in fact, they admitted that. They said, "Yeah, you're kind of one of the younger ones to ever get this acknowledgement," which is makes it even more of an honor. And it's very nice. It's wonderful to receive that kind of recognition. But one of the first things I thought was, how many other Latinx, Mexicanics, brown people have ever been a guest of honor at a Worldcon? This thing at that point had been 76 years strong. And I just kind of wondered. And so I went back to the history and then asked a couple people who were smarter than me to go through the history as well. And there was zero. There was nobody before me.
You were the first.
Yeah, I think thankfully there have been some black people that had been guests of honor, thankfully. But as far as my community and my culture and Latinx people in general, zero. And instead of getting mad about it, I just kind of got a little frightened. Actually, I kind of thought, well, it's great if I'm the first, but what happens if I'm the last? Because I look behind me and there's a lot of great creators, but how many of them are going to be seen as being at this point in their career to where they're going to get a shot at something like this? How long is that going to take? Well, I'm not the most patient guy in the world, so I thought I think I need to step this up and make something happen here, especially for Mexicanos, for Mexican Americans. It's not to leave out the rest of the Latinx pie, but I saw at that point very little representation of my people in the professional field, and certainly Mexican writers. And when I say Mexican, I mean writers from Mexico, living in Mexico, working in Mexico, being represented in the American publishing spectrum, very lean, especially in the science fiction fantasy field. And so, I just got in my head that I wanted to invite maybe 2 to 4 of those people to the Worldcon. I would pay for their memberships and maybe start to try to open a few doors for them if I could. That was how it started. Well, I tweeted that on a January morning in 2018. And within 5 minutes, John Scalzi, one of the great American authors we have in science fiction, he tweeted a response that I never expected to get, which was, "I'll match you." Well, I wasn't looking for that. And it just came out of the blue. And Scalzi being Scalzi, of course, it led to other people saying, well, if John Scalzi's going to match, I'll match. And so all of a sudden, this money started coming at me where people wanted to support this little endeavor I was doing and perhaps bring more people to the Worldcon. At the same time, there was a right-wing faction, of which we don't need to go into, who was taking note of this and I guess throwing some smoke, let's just say.
Yeah, there was an incident with the Hugo Awards a few years ago as well, where there was that contingent of like, well, why are people asking for additional attention? And it's like, there hadn't been a lot up to this point.
Yeah, I won't go into them, but let's just say their comments just escalated my competitiveness, where I decided, well, I was going to go for this many people, a few people, a handful of people. Let's go for 50. Let's go for 50. So I instead decided, let's bring an all-star squad of the best of us. And,
I also imagine, kind of ironically, that probably some of those attacks may have also caused other people to notice you and actually want to support. Call that a little bit of the Barbrastreisand effect. If you complain about it enough, people are going to be like, "Oh, what are they complaining about? Let me find out."
Yeah, maybe. I never thought of that. That's a good point. Probably a valid.
It's like, thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think at the time, you're just so tunnel vision on trying to take care of these people that you're bringing into this milieu that they've never been in before, and and then picking the right people too. And that's a large part of this. Since then, there have been a number of initiatives that I hear people call them copycats, and I don't look at them as copycats at all. I mean, any cultural community that wants to use what I did as a template or as an example and build off of it, you're not a copycat. You're a hero mission. I think these things have my full support, my full endorsement. All of my heart goes out to these people who want to try to do something like this. So to kind of wrap up what we're talking about here, I basically invited 50 people, 42 of them ended up making it to that Worldcon. And the idea was to bring an all-star squad of writers, editors, artists, filmmakers, creators who wanted to work in the science fiction fantasy field. Some of them who were already established maybe in Mexico, or maybe say like in the case of Marcela Aviles, who was the creative consultant on Coco. All right, she's the woman who, when Disney makes the faux pas of trying to trademark Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, a lot of people in the community remember that.
Yeah, you remember that. It was awful, and it really was a PR. It was one of the few times I ever heard Disney have to apologize.
Yeah. But the form of their apology, which was essentially bringing on those consultants, made a big difference.
And that was Marcela. That was exactly right. That was Marcela. So Marcela was one of those people that came in and basically brought that thing up like a phoenix from the ashes and rebuilt it and started from scratch and said, you have to understand the culture, and you have to understand it at a root level, and it has to be genuine, or else we will see it and we will smell it out and we will let you know it. And so she was for my money, and this is just my opinion, she's the reason why that's an Oscar-winning classic that will live forever, is because I know that there was the director Lee Unkrich, might be mispronouncing the last name, major force there, and there were several producers that really took on board Marcela's advice. But I think a lot of her insight and perspective really led to that film having the endearing success that it's going to have forever. So I wanted her a part of the initiative. Well, she didn't need us, and she didn't necessarily need to be in science fiction fantasy, but she understood what I was trying to do, and she understood the caliber of talent that I was bringing in and wanted those relationships for herself. So even someone as powerful as her understood that this was something that could benefit even someone in her position. So you had people at that level, but a lot of it was about trying to bring in people who were going to be the new bloods, who were going to be the ones who were going to take the baton and run forward. And that was why I wanted to do this in the first place, was to bring not just more of our representation into the field, but bring people who were going to be able to carry the ball much further than I'll be able to, because they're younger than me and they're going to have newer ideas as time goes on. But then they're going to learn to hand it off to the next generation. So it was important to me to bring in the young bloods, and so that means doing your research and doing the vetting, and really kind of figuring out, even if somebody doesn't have a huge body of work, will they be able to carry the mantle for this and be able to carry that weight? And I will say that I don't know how to put that into a playbook, but it took me 6 months of emails and phone conversations and sifting through sort of these I guess you could call them almost applications, where people were saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. Well, I kind of had to whittle it down to this group that I ended up assembling. And as I said, 50 whittled down to 42 as far as the actual attendees. And then since then, now here 2 years later, I would say about half the group has become sort of almost like this unbreakable family that supports each other, that looks out for each other, that opens doors for each other.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna say. This is the big thing about this, is you've had people that helped you get through that door, and now it's like getting so many others through the door as well, whether it's through publishing or art or writing or whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's pretty amazing. You mentioned a little bit earlier copycats and the idea that, oh, well, maybe somebody's copying you and you're like, I don't mind. That reminds me of similar conversations I've had where I would talk about an artist or a creator who's making maybe something inspired by this particular aspect of Latin American culture. And somebody would say, oh, well, isn't that too much competition if there's somebody else doing a similar thing? And my response is always, no, more of it is better. It's like the more that you have out there, the more that there is exposure, the more that there is acceptance in the general popular culture as well, not just within the community. And well, I guess I want to ask you how you feel about this. Do you think that more in the community are doing this to help promote each other and to help, cross-pollinate, I guess?
Yeah, more of it's happening and more of it needs to happen. I mean, we're nowhere close. And when I say we, I'll branch it out or expand it beyond just Mexicanics or Mexican American
Of
culture.
course.
Right? Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, all of it needs more representation. I just took the Mexicanics angle because that is my culture, and then
Right.
I said earlier, I just wasn't seeing us represented hardly at all, and so but that didn't mean that the rest of it needs to be left out. And so when I see creators who are trying to lift up those, I tell my people, it's up to us not to just look out for Mexicanics. It's up to us to look out for those other Latinx endeavors, for Black endeavors, for Afro-Latinx endeavors, for Filipino endeavors, for Asian endeavors, for all of it. It's up to us now to not just look out for our own, but to look out for those as well and help lift those. Because just because we make it through or think we've made it through is not good enough. We're going to need to make sure that the rest of these communities get to come forward as well, or else we really haven't done our job. It's in the end, and I'm not sure if I thought that when I first started or founded the Hakonex Initiative, and it was just about the Mexicanics, and I just want to make sure I just wanted to get them to Worldcon, for Christ's sake. I mean, that was really all I
mean, I feel like that's like a small goal that leads to a bigger picture.
It did, and it led real fast. And a lot of people ask me, well, what's next for it, and what are you going to do? And I think people think of it with the wrong, or at least with a different frame than me. I never thought of this as the Mickey Mouse Club. I never thought it as something we're going to have T-shirts and we're going to have gang jackets, and I never thought of it as a club. I never thought of it as expanding. I never thought, well, success is when we have 3,000 members. That was never in my head. But I realize now people think that way. They think, well, the more followers and the more people you have in your group, the better. And I actually think maybe not the opposite, but in a flip of that, which is that 6 months that I spent that critical spring and summer and trying to pick those people, it was because I knew that was for life. And I knew that those people, it's almost like taking a block of marble and chipping away at it to get to the sculpture that's in the middle. That 50, I chose them very carefully. I chose that marble block really carefully. But as that, and I wasn't the one doing the chiseling. I think the people themselves, the people within the group did the chiseling, where some of them decided, well, this is good, but there's something else for me elsewhere. So some of them kind of drift off. Well, what you're left with within that block, that remaining 25 or so that have stuck together, I mean, that is the group, and that's going to be the ones that are then going to pass it on. So I don't look at it as it's up to me to sort of say, well, you're in the club or you're in the family. It's not the way it is. I already did that. The important work that I did was making sure that I picked the right ones. And so I'm always proud of the 50 that were selected, but those 25 that have really stuck together and said, this is for life, and we're not just here to represent ourselves, but we're here to represent the culture and here to do what's right. That's the strength of the group. That's the future of the group. And so whatever they do, that's where we're headed. It's really not about, hey, Picacio, what are you going to do? What's next? Well, the group's gonna be what's next. The group is what's next. And so how I help them right now to continue to strengthen their platforms and their positions, maybe that's where my work is at. And in fact, I know that's what my work is. But it's about Julia Rios. It's about David Bowles. It's about Gonzalo Alvarez. It's about Gabriela Damian Miravete. It's about Livia Brenda Castro. It's about Alberto Chimal. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm just saying that.
It's like, you know who you are.
They definitely know who they are. Dianita Cerón, I'm looking at you. Sarah Felix. It's about these people carrying the mantle. And when I made the choice to pull them in, is because I believe they would be able to carry that mantle, even if they weren't showing it at that point because they were so, in some cases, so green. I just knew they'd be able to. I believe they would, and they're showing that they are going to be capable of carrying it. So
let me ask real quick, beyond the Hakonex Initiative, what would you like to see after this whole thing the world is in right now is over, and there are conventions again, and there are ceremonies again, and gatherings again? What would you like to see on a broader basis, whether that be from other groups doing fundraisers or from the actual conventions and entities themselves? What would you like to see happen?
I'm going to go broader than that. I mean, what do I want to see? When you say something about what do you want to see, I mean, what I want to see is the same thing I wanted to see in 2018. I want to see more Hakonex stories in the wider stream of world storytelling. And what I mean by that is I want to see our work not just being represented in the U.S. publishing market. I want to see it in the world publishing market. I want to see these people on the biggest platforms possible. I want to see their stories seen by the most people possible. And that's what I want for them. And some of them are more ready than others, but that is what I want. So I would start from up there. That's where my head is at. As far as the American science fiction or the science fiction fantasy literary convention scene, I mean, you take that same answer and just kind of bring it down to that level. I would say I want more representation. I want to see. First, you've got to put yourself onto the radar of the people who are organizing these things, and that's happening right now. I mean, there's a convention that's happening this weekend called Armadillo Con in Austin, Texas, I think where you're based, and Libia Brenda Castro is one of their featured guests. And 2 years ago that was unthinkable. 2 years ago, before Libia is part of the initiative, there had never been a Mexican woman ever nominated for a Hugo in the 76-year history of the Hugo. And she broke through that next year and became the first Mexican woman, and rightfully so. And there's going to be more after her. Gabriela Damian Miravete became the first Mexican to ever win what was called the Tiptree Award at the time, now named the Otherwise Award. That's a major literary award for feminist fiction, as I understand. I should say this: it's a huge acknowledgement from the Wisconsin community, and it's a big deal. And she was recognized with that award. And again, we're going back to awards, but these are things that start to kind of help put these people on the map with publishers and creators who say, I didn't know about this person. I need to know. I need to know about this person. I need to be working with this person. And that's
I would think as these people are being put on the map, it's also kind of putting the community as a whole on the map as well. People are noticing, well, the first of, oh, wait, there's a community there. Let's look at that.
That's exactly right, Kevin. That's it. So, that's that thing about that number one, right? That number one carries power. So like when it's the first one that does something, there's a headline that comes with that, right? Of, oh, this is the first one. But I do say, just like with my position, that what does that first one then do to make sure that headline goes beyond just the individual achievement? How does it then have ripples for the people that come behind you? And I'm proud to say that Libya and Gabby have both absolutely 100% taken on the mantle of saying, this is more than about me. And that's why I picked them. Character mattered when I was making those choices. It wasn't just about the work. It was about who's going to have the right values and think beyond themselves. And that's why we're a family.
Well, John, when I look at these covers, one thing that I was wondering rather was, what medium are you using? My first instinct was this is digital, but then you've been working at this since before digital became the standard for a lot of the industry. So how do you make these covers? How do you make these images?
Yeah, I think over the course of my career, I've used I've been paints. I think early on, it was a lot of photography, and I turned off to that pretty quick because I wanted to be more of a draftsman, more of a painter that like the people I was inspired by. I didn't want to be so photography driven. There was a lot of artists that were able to use it well, but I didn't feel that the stuff didn't resonate with me emotionally as much as drawing and paint did. And the reason I was leaning on photography so much early on was because my skills just weren't good enough. And so it was up to me to improve those skills so that I could make them more forward. And so now, of course, photography for me is more about reference photos that I'll shoot of models that I'll then use as reference for my drawings and paintings. But the photography isn't actually the actual cover, like it was maybe way back early on in my career. But really, I mean, in the end, it comes down to what do you love the most? What do you love doing the most? And for me, it's drawing. Drawing is always where the most joy is, more than painting, certainly more than sitting in front of a computer pushing pixels around. I mean, physically drawing with a pencil, with graphite, that's where the love is. That's where I always want to be. That's when I feel like no matter what deadline I have, I feel like I'm floating. I feel like I'm most alive. And so, it's drawing these very intense graphite drawings that I then scan in, and then I'll build up my color layers in Photoshop on top of that. I do have the ability to traditionally paint. In fact, there's a lot of my covers that are traditionally painted with no digital, or kind of maybe more like about 12, 13, 14 years ago. You'd see some more of those in my portfolio. But I think nowadays with my schedule, I spend so much time on those drawings, and my deadlines are so tight that it does help to kind of build up my colors in Photoshop to allow me to really dive into those drawings the way I want to. So it's kind of a compromise, that hybrid formula that I've created of drawing and Photoshop. It's not an unusual formula. I mean, there's other artists that kind of use a recipe like that, but I think my reliance on these very intense graphite drawings, it probably is one of the things that kind of brands me, so to speak. It makes my work somewhat recognizable. But yeah, that's where the love is, the graphite drawing. That's it for me.
Do you ever see yourself someday going back to panel work on a comic book, doing like pages of a comic book?
Panel to panel, at the moment, no, because I mean, doing that stuff self-published when I was in my mid-20s, I still have vivid memories of it. They're all great, but I also understand it gave me a very real, early, grounded view of just how hard that is to do. And that's back when I was living with my parents. You know, I don't have that luxury anymore, and that was hard work. You know, and I have to be honest with myself. Am I fast enough? Am I skilled enough to be able to do that on a daily basis and keep up and not fall behind? I don't think I'm fast enough, and I think it would have to be a special project, probably something that would be self-generated, something where I kind of co-owned on the IP before I would feel like I would have the ability and be willing to take the risk to do sequential. Now, comic book cover art, that's a different thing. That's something where of late I've thought if the right opportunities came, I would totally do it. The scale on those, the pay scale on comic book covers is far less than what I'm used to getting on book covers.
But it'd be a labor of love.
It'd be a labor of love. That ain't gonna pay the bill, but if you pick your right spots, you can do it. And that's what I would entertain. Whereas 5 years ago, I don't think I would have looked at comic book covers, just because I honestly couldn't afford to take on those opportunities. Now I think things are a little more stable to where, yeah, I think I could afford to take on a few comic book covers and not, put us in jeopardy over here. So yeah, I would love to do it if the right ones came. So, knock knock, Batman, DC, Marvel, Phantom Stranger, Spectre, all of that.
Star Wars?
Yeah, I'd love to do Star Wars. Star Wars book covers, Star Wars comic covers. I'd be totally into that. Star Wars is a big one. Yeah, you don't get to rub the magic lamp and make a wish. I mean, I know sometimes social media seems to work that way, where people say, I'm going to put this out there and hope that it happens. I guess maybe it happens every once in a while for some people, and more power to them. But if those things came, I mean, it probably won't be because I sit here and say I want it. It'll be because somebody says, hey, that guy could do something that we need. So hopefully that'll come around. I would love to do it.
Well, John, I want to thank you very much for this conversation. But before we close up, I want to ask one more time, I guess, are there any upcoming projects or places where people can see your work or look forward to things coming out soon that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, as far as upcoming projects, I'll have more Loteria cards coming up by the end of the year. I'm working on 3 or 4 new ones. I know a lot of people have been waiting on me to put out some more of them. So that'll be coming by the end of the year. I'm working on a Stephen King limited edition right now for a book called Needful Things that came out a few decades ago, actually. And I'm doing a new illustrated limited edition that'll come out through PS.
Wow.
I'm currently working on that. Working on some new covers, most of them that I can't talk about.
That's fair.
There is one that's out there that a lot of people have seen that I am going to hype, because it's Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun. And so Rebecca Roanhorse is one of our best authors that we have right now in the field, one of the most notable and one of the most acclaimed, and for all the right reasons, because her stuff is phenomenal. Native American, African American creator who I think this Black Sun book that she puts out in October will be coming out from Saga, which is an imprint of Simon Schuster. Mm-hmm. I've read it, obviously, because I did the cover for it, and it's phenomenal. And I think it's the first of a series. And I can tell you right now, it's going to break your heart when you're at the end of it, because you're going to say, I need that next book right now. And very few books do that to me, because I know how the tricks work. But this one, I was like, damn it, I need that next book now. In fact, I literally emailed her that night and said, you're working on the next one, right? And yeah, I won't tell you what she said, but I was just like, oh boy.
It drew you into the world.
Yeah, it's going to make you want. Let me just put it to you that way. It's a phenomenal read, and people are going to be in love with it. So that cover, that one everybody's going to see on October 13th. There's other covers I'm working on right now that probably will be seeing their way in the spring. And I'll just say one last note is those Calavera masks, we are selling them fast and furious. So, go to the website, www.johnpicacio.com, and there's some pretty prominent header link there where you'll be able to see and order the mask. And take care of yourselves out there. I mean, I don't think I have to say, these next few weeks that we're about to go through, at least in this country, in the United States, they're going to be in the history books one way or another. So let's fight. That's all I have to say to you people. We're going to have to fight for our lives. We are fighting for our lives. So let's go. Let's go. Mask up.
Mask up and be out there on the front lines. John, thank you again very much.
Appreciate it, man. Very much. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
And thank you for listening to our discussion today with John Picacio on art and advocacy for the Geekspanic Heritage Month, which once again is from September 15th to October 15th. For this and other content on Hispanic heritage and Latinx culture, please visit www.nerdtinoexpo.com and be sure to follow Nerdtino on all the usual social media outlets: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, all at Nerdtino. And you can find Monomythic at monomythic.com, as well as Facebook, YouTube, and a few other places. Anyway, thank you and good night.